Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, oh, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Twas grace that taught my heart to fear,
my heart to feel,
and
grace
my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear,
that grace appear
in the hour I first believed.
Danger and toils and snares that I have already come. It was grace
has
brought me safe this far, and grace will lead me home.
When we have been there, 10,000 years,
10,000 years,
bright shining as the sun. We have no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
but now I'm fine. I was blind, but now I see.
Greetings and welcome to the March on Washington Film Festival. I'm Isa Sarabay, Artistic Director. As always, we begin by acknowledging the source of all life and the 7 directions, north, south, east, west, above, below, and within, and to the cycle of life of African ancestored peoples, those who've gone on before, those living, and those yet to be born. Because they were, we are. Because we are, they will be. Our theme, Who Tells the Story, is inspired by the African proverb, until the lion learns to write, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We are lifting up the authentic and often denied stories and voices of history, and opening space for each of us to be self-determined in telling our own stories. One such powerful storyteller is pioneering African-American filmmaker Oscar Micheaux, who paved the way for Black Hollywood today. We've assembled a panel of industry professionals for a discussion which will be led by Angelique Jackson. Angelique is a 3-time Emmy winner for her work as a reporter and producer at Entertainment Tonight. She is now film and entertainment reporter for the legendary trade publication and our media entertainment partner, Variety. We are thrilled to have her with us. Welcome, Angelique.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We are thrilled to be here, and I'm even more thrilled to welcome our panelists for this Black Hollywood Then and Now conversation. First, we have the Oscar-winning filmmaker, Roger Ross Williams.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next up, we have Dr. Yoruba Rishin, who is the director of The Sit-In.
Hi. Not a doctor, not yet, but nice to see you, Roger and Angelique.
Nice to see you, Yoruba.
And last and certainly not least, we have Hill Harper, actor, author, and entrepreneur.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, because this is an interesting time. We are undergoing, quite frankly, the greatest racial reckoning in both our country and our industry since the 1960s. And I'm going to just start with a very broad question. What is the greatest challenge facing Black people in the film industry today? Hill, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, wow. Whenever a question's presented, like what's the greatest, I don't know if I want to go to that, but I would say one of the biggest issues I would say is the ability to tell really diverse stories in whatever form of entertainment, whether it's musically, whether it's film, television, and really seeing the diverse nature of who we are. In many ways, for years and years and years, the entertainment industry has sold a lot of Black trauma. We sold a lot of trauma, and that's one thing. And trauma is real, but we are so much more. There's so many communities, so many different folks, and those stories tend to not get told as much, or certainly not as much as they should. So I think having more diverse filmmakers from different backgrounds, different orientations, more diverse writers, more diverse folks in the rooms, in the agencies where it's virtually no Black people in leadership in any of the major agencies, more folks obviously in the studio system, on the music side, in every area. So having diverse folks with diverse stories can help create much more diverse in terms of the storytelling and what we get to see.
Absolutely. Yoruba, for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know, which Hill just mentioned, that the gatekeepers are still the majority white. And until that changes, we're not going to have the kind of diverse storytelling that we need. So that is a huge thing. And it's been entrenched since the beginning of the entertainment industry. And though we are seeing such a great plethora of Black stories, on TV, on streaming, there still is that wall of the who makes the decisions, who funds, who's in the room, that makes those decisions. And that's until that changes, we're still going to be very challenging.
And last but not least, to you, Roger, especially as we try and foster the next generation of Black filmmakers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just riffing off of what Hill and Yoruba said, I mean, it's about who gets to tell the story. For so long, our stories have been told through the lens of other people, through mostly the lens of white people. And, especially I would say across in the entertainment industry, I can talk specifically about the documentary community where it is, we have these white filmmakers who sort of helicopter into our communities, sort of tell these stories about the pain and struggle of Black people, and then they leave. And they don't have the complexity or the sensitivity, and this has been the lens that sort of most documentaries about the African community have been told. And I think that in this sort of time of racial reckoning, this is a time where we're fighting. We're fighting back. We're challenging that. But as Yoruba said, until the gatekeepers change, it's going to be those white filmmakers who still keep getting those jobs, those commissions. And it's also about, for us, I think a really big challenge is fostering that sort of next generation of filmmakers of color, so that there is a pipeline, like getting the pipeline going, so that that is both on the, some of the work we're doing. I'm the governor in the Academy of Arts, Pictures of Arts and Sciences, and one of the new initiatives we're doing is about that executive track. How do we get the pipeline? How do we get people on that track to be in those positions where they are decision makers? So we're fighting the good fight, but we have a long way to go.
Well, can I just add something really quick? One of the things too that I've been thinking about this last year and making a couple of projects too is that it's not only hiring the Black filmmakers and the gatekeepers, which we all just talked about, but it's also the lens in which these stories are told. It's one thing to hire people of color and to hire Black people, but if you are if we are working for these production companies that are white led and white executives, as Roger just talked about the executives, there can often be a lens that even still is you have to fight against or you have to challenge. One thing that comes up to me, especially in this time of protests against police brutality and the racial reckoning, is sometimes we're considered biased when we come in because or we're questioned. Because we are, from these communities that have, experienced it and have to fight against that. So that's another issue. I think the lens has to change. It's not just hiring us, but it's actually changing the way in which we understand and tell stories, and whose lens, issues around bias and what that means, and objectivity and what that means.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the hardest. Hill, please.
I was just going to say, I think that Roger makes a great point, and to follow up on that, as far as the lens point, is there's this cue made to folks who are coming up as to what can get made, and it's very subtle, and it's very, it's like it's almost like pre-guiding someone in terms of the type of stories that we would be willing to greenlight. And when that type of behavior exists, we see it in music all the time. I mean, music's a great example because it's much more out in front and in your face because, people say, well, how come we have all this type of music that's talking about misogyny, that's talking about the N-word, talking about this, and this, and we can't get a different type of music from all these artists. And the artists will tell you, listen, we go to these record companies, they, it's never really said to our face, but they say, whenever we present this song, it's like, nah, that's probably not going to make the album, but this song is going to be on the album, right? And that happens in all elements of entertainment to the point where folks starts to even influence their creativity to the types of things they even begin to develop. And so if we're really talking about blowing up diverse storytelling and really trying to allow people the freedom to really tell really rich stories, we have to deal with that side of the ball that's already sort of pre-editing what folks are allowing themselves to even come up with in terms of their storytelling.
Absolutely. There is this kind of like reverse engineering even within the Black Hollywood community that we kind of have to do too, is like, yes, we've been told 300,000 times, Black films don't sell overseas, all of these things, but we have to find a way to work around that and no longer, allow those kinds of stereotypical gates to continue to go up. Roger, since you mentioned the Academy, that's the thing that everyone has been talking about in the industry right now, is the new inclusion rules to qualify for Best Picture. What is your take on how this influences and changes storytelling?
It's a beginning. It's a beginning, it's a beginning that the Academy, really was really forced into from Oscar So White. It was like, it was really social media. It was really Black Twitter, that started this. And the Academy had to change. I mean, this is Hollywood was built on racism, right? Birth of a Nation, the first Hollywood movie. And it has perpetuated racist ideas, all the way, and still does to this day. So I always say, as an Academy, what do we want to be? Do we want to be an Academy that is just part of the problem, part of the system, or do we want to kind of lead the way? And I think the Academy has been sort of forced, and now it's changing. When I was elected to the Board of Governors, I was the second Black governor after Cheryl Boone Isaacs, the president, CBI, the legendary Cheryl. And I walked into that boardroom, and there is, Spielberg representing directors and Tom Hanks and actors and all the, and all these very powerful, it's kind of the Hollywood power. That room is Hollywood power. And I felt invisible, Now we have Ava DuVernay, we have Whoopi Goldberg, we have Wynn Thomas, we have all these Black people on the board now, and Devon Franklin, who heads up the big initiative, and it's different. I can't even, I don't even recognize where we are now to when I walked in that door for the first time. So there is progress being made, but we're dealing with systematic racism that is so big. It's just chipping away. It's going to take a long time. But with, like soldiers like Ava and Whoopi leading the way, we're gonna crack it. It's just gonna take some time, and the new initiatives is a start.
Yes, a start. I mean, what are some other ways that we can effectively create these pathways for Black people to hold, prominent positions in the industry? Is it studio distribution ownership? How can we stop asking permission, or is that the way? Hill, I'll go to you.
I think that technology it's a double-edged sword. It offers us this opportunity to distribute directly to a consumer, to become your own studio. It offers a young person or anybody, young, old, or whoever that has a phone, to make a movie. I mean, you can create right now. You can record music right now. You can do all of these things, right? So technology offers that. The flip side of that is there's, I think it was a Monster.com commercial or something years ago that sort of tells the story where they say it's easy to identify talent, and there are two tennis players and somebody hits a winner, but then it's impossible to identify talent when, and then they just had all these people rush the court and hitting balls everywhere. And it's like, you could be Serena Williams on a court, but if there's 1,000 people on the court hitting balls, there's no way to know that there's this Serena right there. So the thing that happens is that, yes, I think it's beautiful that we can create content and we can have so many people putting up and loading up content, whether it's through their social platforms or whether it's through other non-traditional platforms. And so you don't necessarily need the marketing muscle of the studio behind you, etc. But at the same time, how do the people who are making like just incredible, life-changing content ultimately get seen? There's a lot of young filmmakers I work with that are very frustrated that even within the film festival area, they feel like they're lost. And they're like, I've worked so hard on this project, and 7 people plus, and including my mother and my father, have seen it. So that's only 5 people have seen it, So how do we solve that problem of letting people who work extremely hard have access to actually getting their work seen in a way that's meaningful to them and sort of celebrates their work, but at the same time, we don't have to always go through a studio system lens or the major film festival lens just to get a work seen.
Absolutely. Ruba, would you like to add?
Sorry. I know obviously the world has changed with COVID and its effect on film festivals. Obviously, we're all here virtually where normally we would probably be in person. But I will say one of the things that I think has been helpful in my own career and in other filmmakers who are starting out is the film festival circuit. And it's not the major film festival circuit I'm talking about. For example, my first festival tour I did with my film The New Black. And I was at a lot of festivals. I premiered at the LA Film Festival, which no longer exists, unfortunately. But then I was at African American film festivals primarily and LGBTQ film festivals. And they really supported the work and they really got folks out there. And I was out there, you know, showing it to these audiences, building audiences, building excitement for the film and for the premiere of the film. I wish there were more African American film festivals, the LGBT film festivals. You go to any little town, there's an LGBTQ film festival, and I wish we had that kind of infrastructure. And so it's not, you know, just about premiering at Sundance, but really being able to take the film to these different audiences across the world. And maybe it's the different audiences, maybe it's now going to be virtual for a while. But these virtual film festivals are getting a lot of audiences. So I think that's something that we could sort of build up more for up and coming film directors.
Absolutely. It is a great platform and a great way to get people to see things. Also speaking to this moment, I would love to talk about the relationship between art and social justice and the power that filmmaking has in that space. And I would love to know how you were each inspired to use filmmaking to tell Black stories and your own truths, and maybe share a movie or a filmmaker that particularly inspired you. Yoruba.
Sure, I'll go first. Well, for me, it was about how I grew up. My mom was a playwright, and I grew up in the theater in New York, and she was a playwright that was very political. Now I see her work, a lot of it I didn't understand as I was growing up. And now I see the work that she was trying to do, really bring the stories of African-American women to the forefront and our experiences. So I always grew up with that art and politics being enmeshed. That was just, part of me. And then I saw some of the early documentaries that I saw. I think one of the first ones that I saw was Stanley Nelson's film about Madam C.J. Walker. And I was amazed that I had, about this story and what you can learn from watching this film and this history that I had never heard of. So I think that's definitely one of the early films that inspired me. I was a teenager when I saw it, to be interested in documentary and to pursue it.
And Hill.
I was just going to say, for me, Spike Lee hired me for my first major film, and it was called Get on the Bus, and it was about a trip to the Million Man March, and it was a bunch of wonderful brothers on this bus headed from LA to DC for the march, and I had the blessing of being able to sit next to Ossie Davis for that entire shooting of that film, basically because, the way the characters sit on the bus, you sit in your seat. So maybe you don't even have a scene that day, but so Ossie and I would sit there and talk for hours and hours, and just to hear him tell me stories about Godfrey Cambridge and tell me stories about Malcolm X coming over to his house with Ruby and talk about how being an actor, it's, looking at someone like Paul Robeson, it's implicit that as a Black man to think about social justice, think about inclusion, think about equity and social equity, and use whatever platform you have. And so to have that blessing really early in my career, not even understanding at the time what a special gift that was, to just be able to sit and talk to him was just, it feeds me even to this day, and sort of, informs sort of the lens from which I kind of see myself as an actor in this industry.
Absolutely. Last but not least, Roger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my influences were, I had a hardworking mother who was a maid, but she was very political. She really instilled in me the importance of being sort of part of, you know, of not just voting, but just being engaged politically. And I think, you know, that was something that affected me early on. But filmmaker wise, when I saw Marlon Riggs' Tongues Untied, I was floored, because I was like, wait a minute, as a Black gay man, I have a voice like that. I couldn't believe this was on television, on public television, and everyone could see it. And I was like, that's what really sort of triggered me to like, okay, I can do this. And my voice mattered. I didn't, you know, I just, you know, at that point I thought, oh, you know, no one wants to hear from me. I'm a double minority. I just had, you know, I was a kid with very low self-esteem. And that was a big game changer for me. And as throughout my career, as I've made films that dealt with social justice, for me it's always been about, you know, sort of entertaining and engaging the audience in a way that I don't want to sort of preach to an audience. I don't want to bore an audience. I want them to walk out of the experience, however they're watching the film, and have been, you know, entertained and learned something and been uplifted, and you know, when my last film was the Apollo, about the Apollo Theater, and when I, you know, for that, obviously music, you know, that's obviously it's you know, it's music, but that film was really political, because our music and our art is what we use to voice where we are, who we are in the world, what our situation is. And it's in Harlem, and there were Black men being shot, men and women being shot in the street. And this happened from the first year it opened in 1934 all the way up, obviously, until now. And so you know, with that film, for me, it was like, you know, tying it to the present day, and using Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and that's the mounting of that stage adaptation, which is a way to engage young people and sort of, and politically, how this is still relevant with what's happening on that stage, whether it was James Brown or NWA or Billie Holiday. So it's about entertaining the audience, you know. And now, as we mount Between the World and Me for HBO, I just last night just watched the first rough cut, and I'm like just blown away at how incredibly engaging and you are. It's not you are experiencing the pain, as Ta-Nehisi says, of the destruction of the Black body, but you have just beautiful, powerful performances by Mahershala Ali and Oprah and Angela Bassett and Black Thought, and it is just mind blowing, because the audience, all of their incredible fans, the people who, you know, who are the fans of all this incredible talent, are coming there, but they're learning. They're experiencing something that's deeply emotional, because so it's about that. I love that balance of social justice and art when that happens.
Well, with that project in particular, I'm so glad that you brought it up, because I was going to. But you know, what about the climate now, and what about HBO made it a good home, and what made it such a good time to bring this project to the screen in this way?
You know, obviously Ta-Nehisi's book has resonated with so many people around the world, and Ta-Nehisi's voice as a intellectual and as a journalist and thinker, you know, Ta-Nehisi is, I always say, he's like the James Baldwin of our time. He's just so brilliant. I think obviously in the racial reckoning that we're going through right now, to bring that to the screen was everyone wanted, you know, it was a bidding war, right? It's interesting to be at the center of a bidding war, and HBO is a perfect home for it, because HBO has really embraced Black creators whether it be Issa Rae or I May Destroy You. I mean, there's so many, you know, and so they understand their audience. They understand the importance of a project like this. So there's no paywall when this premieres, so anyone can see it. It's been an amazing collaboration, and I feel like I think we all felt that this was like the sort of perfect home, you know, because I feel like HBO, you know, because of the type of content that HBO creates.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I want to talk more about that idea that we were speaking about filmmaking and how filmmaking even plays a different role than journalism in the way that we can share our truths. And so that goes for television and film, but just like being on screen. So Yoruba, I'm going to take that question to you. You know, how does it play that different role? How does it bring this to a different kind of audience, or maybe in a more powerful way? How would you describe it?
As I said, I started out in theater. And then I started working in documentary film after graduate school. And then I went over to journalism, and I worked at ABC in journalism in the investigative unit. And now I look at the work that I do combines a lot of those things. And I see the difference of, you know, I teach at I started a journalism program at CUNY. And so I talk a lot about the difference between journalism and particularly, and documentary film. And, you know, what we love, I think, or what I love about documentary film that you can't do in journalism is the creativity that you have as an artist. Documentary is an art. And there's so many different things that we can use to get that emotion that Roger just so beautifully talked about in watching his Rough Cut and what it made him feel, which I know we're all going to feel when we watch that film. And those creative levers that you can play on. I mean, storytelling is the oldest thing, as you know, one of the oldest things that we have as human beings. We love stories, so that affects people in more so than just recounting an event or having to stick to just the facts, man. So we have beautiful latitude in documentary filmmaking, and of course in fiction film. And these stories it's about here. Ultimately it's about here. That is what affects people. There's facts, and of course there's things that we want to tell, especially for social issue documentarians, but it's really about here. And that affects everybody. It doesn't matter what race, what where you're from, what language you speak. That's just universal.
But especially with your recent projects, for example, Peacock's The Sit-In, but with Harry Belafonte hosting The Tonight Show, what were you able to tell about that moment that has largely gone unreported in history that you could only do through a film?
Well, that's a really good question, because of course the challenge with that film is that only so little of that week exists, just an hour. But we were able to, we knew that going in. That was the challenge. How are we going to make a film about this week when only an hour exists? But the reason why it is a film is because the incredible archive of the guests that Harry had on, these amazing guests, everybody from Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, to Diane Carroll, Lena Horne, Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, these incredible roster of folks. And their archive is so deep and so fascinating that we knew we would be able to tell that story with the archive. And of course, interviewing Harry. Harry is the center of this film. And Harry's a fascinating character. He's a fascinating person and character, and telling his story through the film, who he was, how far his tentacles reached in the entertainment industry and in the political world, and how he was bringing that for a week to a mainstream television audience on The Tonight Show. The Tonight Show was one of the most, if not the most popular show on TV when we only had 3 channels back then. Harry, we were in 1968 in the middle of one of the most divisive years ever, racially divisive, politically divisive. And Harry took that week to show his worldview and to bring the politics and entertainment, which wasn't done that often, which now, we see a lot more in terms of late night, but to bring that to a mainstream audience was pretty revolutionary. And you needed to see that to get, to understand what the significance was of that week.
And what does having a project like that able to debut on a streamer do? Like, when it comes to the way that the industry is evolving with streamers, how is it creating more opportunities for Black filmmakers?
Well, streaming, I mean, it's incredible, right? Like when I started in this industry in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like we had no streamers. We barely had Google. So it's amazing to see the how technology has changed everything. Streaming, I think, has presented a lot of opportunities for filmmakers, for Black filmmakers, and for filmmakers in general. But we still have an issue around the gatekeeper. That's still an issue. So, I know Netflix has done a lot in terms of being one of the foremost streamers to have Black content. Peacock this is part of an initiative that Peacock is doing in terms of having Black content. I think there's a realization now from streamers and from the networks that this has to happen. Obviously, the racial reckoning that we're in is bringing that to the fore. But it also made sense for this film to be on Peacock because this was an NBC show. So we were very pleased that it found a home on Peacock, and it will also air on MSNBC as well.
And of course, your work has also spoken directly to the movement with the killing of Breonna Taylor, and the way that documentary really brought into focus all of the different people and powers at play in that moment. How can filmmaking directly impact helping people understand what's going on right now, specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement? Well,
I think that it's like, it can be not one of two ways, but two ways that I think about it. There have been filmmakers like, I think it's Sabah Foylan and her co-director with Who Streets, right? Who were capturing what was happening at the time, independent filmmakers going out and, getting and documenting it. And of course that, is, and then getting going about getting funding, all of that independent route, which, I've totally done and still do. This was a case where I was hired by the New York Times and Left Right, the production company. They had started looking into this, and they wanted to do, they were interested in a piece about what was going on. And as soon as they talked to me about it, it was something that I knew I had to do. And it was a very quick turnaround. So we were able, and because I had the resources and the team around me, that's how we were able to make it happen and put it out there in a really timely fashion. So again, it's, I'm so grateful that they came to me and that I was able to work on this project, and that we need more gatekeepers who look like us or who are looking at, who are changing their lens about these stories and can so we can have the resources to tell them in a timely fashion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to head over to Hill now, because I would love to get from the actor's perspective, what kind of responsibility as an actor do you feel to Black people at times when you're choosing a role? Is that something that comes into your mind when you think about things like that?
I honestly have to say, I think that's individual to the artist. I never would want to say, well, you shouldn't play this role or that role. I can speak about my career where over the course of it, there were roles that would come up and I'd have the opportunity to play that I would just choose not to play because I didn't feel, and usually it was about the project more so than the role. And I think this is an interesting distinction. I don't usually get to play the bad guy very much. I guess I don't strike fear in a lot of people's hearts when they see me. So I love playing bad guys. So when I do get to play bad guys. I was giving a speech one time when I was talking about this very issue, and someone stood up in the Q&A and they said, you're a liar. I said, what? And said, I saw that movie In Too Deep you did with LL Cool J. You played a drug dealer. And the whole idea is what I tried to explain was, it's not just about the role. It's really about the message of the project, because actors act like we want to play different types of roles. And, those are characters we can play, but it's ultimately the message of the movie. So I'll give you an example with that movie In Too Deep, which is about drug dealers, etc. Myself, Omar Epps, Neil Long, Stanley Tucci, whatever. So we, as you're reading that movie, that was a Miramax film. Reading the film, if the movie would have ended with me and LL in the hot tub drinking champagne, saying dealing drugs is good, you don't do that movie, right? But it's a very subtle message. But the point is that Omar Epps, the person who was the character that was actually doing good for the community, wins, in this film. He gets he gets Nia Long. They end up together. He gets us into prison, or at least we have a reckoning for our activities. So to me, it's more about the message of the project for me personally.
Yeah.
I never begrudge anybody for taking any role that they think is either right for them. Folks have to feed their families. Folks have to make a lot of different choices about how they navigate their career. And so, there are definitely roles where folks have won Oscars that I think are projects that were, as far as us as Black people are treated and concerned in those projects, I'm like, but at the same time, I'm happy that those actors took those roles because they deserve to be lauded for their performances. So it's a slippery slope, and it's a tough question to answer about navigating. I just know for me, I try to just do projects that represent us in the best light possible, that celebrate our spirit, that celebrate us in terms of human spirit. Roger was just talking about this film. I'll tell you, Roger's he's a national treasure. This film, Between the World and Me. I remember Mahershala and I would be at auditions. This is years and years and years ago. We'd be at auditions for stuff. A few lines here or a guest spot here, and to see his career evolve, and then to see legacy work being done. So what Roger's doing is legacy work. What legacy work is projects that are going to last well beyond all of us. Projects that are going to impact people, like Oscar Michaud's work, right? These are things. And so there's only certain times in an actor's career where you get the opportunity to do what I call legacy work. Right. And a lot of that work in between, to be honest, is you're doing hopefully good work and solid work, but you're also, paying your bills and supporting your family. And sometimes something that you don't even think is going to be a legacy project turns into a legacy project. And sometimes you're doing something that you think is going to be that legacy project and it doesn't, folks don't see it, or they don't see it the way you thought they would. So, it's a journey in many ways. And I think every artist and every actor kind of has to make their own decision about how they go.
And the reason why I asked that too is to illuminate that idea that it is such a personal conversation. But when did you realize that power that you could have as an actor to make that choice on how we represent Black people on screen? When did you make that realization when you decided to get into this profession, or was it after?
It was no. It was before, because growing up and seeing people like Sidney Poitier and seeing Denzel Washington and seeing folks that represented the best of us and represented pride and strength and confidence as Black men, intelligence, that's so inspiring, right? I remember I was in grad school at Harvard, and I loved LA Law, and Blair Underwood came to speak at Harvard, and I was so excited. So I was like tripping over myself trying to get to him and talk to him, and because he was on LA Law, you know, and so he was representing this intelligent, beautiful, handsome man, and young guy, and very, you know, and then you fast forward years later, and I'm doing a show with him called City of Angels. It was like an amazing cast: Viola Davis, me, Blair, and Vivica Fox, and Gabrielle Union, and Maya Rudolph, and
It's like a few people we've heard of.
Bokeem Woodbine, an incredible cast that Paris Barkley, who's another national treasure, and Stephen Bochco put together at the time, right? And so, you know, you see things and you aspire to something because it touches something in you, and it's hard to explain. But you know, for me, just being touched by seeing these images and saying, hey, maybe I could do this because I love it, I enjoy it, and could I represent that? Could I do that? Now, when I did He Got Game with Denzel, and I asked him to be my mentor, and he turned around and said, man, shut the fuck up. I'm going to be your mentor. That's a whole different story. But I say that to say is that Denzel has always been that brother who represents the best. And he's always represented this pinnacle. And I think that every young Black actor, at least in my generation, has always looked to D and said, hey, man, I need you to be my mentor. Please, 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 you know, be my mentor. Because everybody, you know, wanted to aspire to represent that, I think, in many ways.
Absolutely. And you take that, of course, off screen as well in your work, in your activism. You know, why has it been so important to you to use your platform off screen as well?
You know, what's the use of a platform if you, and mine's very small. Let's be very clear. There are people with massive platforms, much bigger than mine, but what's the use of a platform if you don't use it to try to do some type of good, help the human condition? And, you know, the books that I wrote kind of just came out of what seemed to be a need. You know, I ended up starting a foundation for young people, and those books kind of came out of that. And, you know, if you're made aware of something, of an injustice, and you can actually do something about it or speak into it, then I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do that. We're here for such a short period of time. I mean, we're barely here. 15 billion years of evolution, and we're here for 100 if you're lucky. I mean, it's less than a snap. And so every moment is precious. And why don't we try to leave a legacy to make the world just a little bit better?
Well, on the topic of legacy, I would love to speak to everyone, of course, about the legacy of the great Oscar Micheaux. When you think about Micheaux's work, how do you characterize his importance? And really, Micheaux is an inspiration. Hill, I'll start with you.
Well, I think that whenever someone is truly blazing a trail, and also we can't forget that he was doing this during a time when there was so much opposition to us owning anything, you know, to us, you know, being able to have ownership. And he was like, I'm going to own the product. I'm going to own, you know, and in many ways you think about somebody like Tyler Perry, who has said, you know, the same thing. You know, I'm going to own my studio. I'm going to own, or musical artists that say, I'm going to own my masters. Mm-hmm. I'm going to own the film. I'm going to own the show. I'm going to own the content. You know, it's a very powerful way to be, and it's very inspiring to me. I mean, extremely inspiring.
Absolutely, Ruba.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly, that what Oscar Micheaux was doing at a time where Black people were being killed for ownership, for owning things, and for creating for being entrepreneurs in all fields. I also think of the kind of imagery that Micheaux put out there on screen, where he really showed violence that was happening to Black women, for example, through his movies. The middle class and upper class Black communities, which we never talked, which have been not discussed and understood in terms of Black towns and self-sufficient Black communities. So this kind of imagery that he was putting out there is incredible to look at now. And he's somebody that I think we're only now, in the last bunch of years discovering. Again, that history has been buried. So the more we can learn and understand what Oscar Micheaux was doing, the more I think it can help us and inspire us as filmmakers, and to own our own stuff, our studios, be those gatekeepers, not wait for anybody else to give us permission to make films.
Roger, for you, that influence of Oscar Micheaux as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I think it's when we look at I talked about this a little bit earlier. We look at the history of Hollywood, and and I talked about earlier how Hollywood was sort of it's been built on racist ideas and racist films, and whether that's Tarzan or King Kong or or Birth of a Nation, it is so inspiring to see a filmmaker like Oscar Micheaux who just sort of broke through all that and created films on his own terms. And I think as we, I've been thinking about this because as again with the Academy, as we're building a museum, which is a very expensive endeavor, and I think it's important to celebrate Oscar Micheaux in that museum. And I don't know if there are plans to do that, but because that's the flip side of what Hollywood was really about. Oscar was the flip side of that, and to show that like throughout history, despite all of the challenges that Black people face, and whether that's in Hollywood or in America, let's say, we still persist. We still rise above. We are, it is the story of African Americans is a powerful and an amazing story, and he's an example of that.
Well, speaking lastly of the Academy, Roger, how has Hollywood changed since the moment you won your Oscar?
How has Hollywood? Sorry.
How has Hollywood changed since the moment that you won your Oscar? Looking back at that moment, what does it signify for you for the future of Black filmmakers?
I think that there's more, more and more films by Black filmmakers are being greenlit. We have filmmakers like Ava who are charting their own path and creating their own lines of distribution. We have when I won in 2010, it was shocking to me that an African American director had never won an Oscar. That was shocking to me. How can that be? And I'm in there in the theater with, and John Singleton is coming up to me and bowing. I'm like, how are you bowing down to me? I'm like a kid. I'm bowing down to you. It was just sad. And I think that, that is changing. That Spike got his Oscar finally last year. I mean, we did have a bit of a setback with Green Book, and I'm gonna say that, not that, but Spike won, and as always, Spike voiced his opinion, and so I think things are changing. I think that the racial reckoning is changing things a lot, because I know you know, I'm sure Ruba can attest to this, that our phones are ringing off the hook now. You know, that people are like, you know, I'm doing my first scripted film with a major studio, and they just weren't greenlighting it. But on Juneteenth, they call me and they greenlight my film. So, and they said, and they were pretty honest, you know, this is because we gotta start greenlighting works of Black people.
Yeah.
So, you know, things are changing.
I just want to add too, and not to you know, not to toot your horn, Roger, but Roger has been so instrumental in speaking specifically about documentary. What I thought you were going to say, you know, when you entered, I remember watching you get that Oscar on television and being like, oh my gosh, a Black person getting for even just documentary, you know, not having African Americans in the documentary field. I mean, I'm sure when you got into the branch, there were no Black people.
There were like maybe two, and when I got in, there were like five.
Yeah, and very few of those are even African American women, Black women. And none, right? I think right. And what Roger has done to diversify the documentary branch is nothing short of revolutionary. Because people think, oh, it's documentary, people liberal, they're social issue justice, da da da. Super white and telling people of color stories with impunity. This is what they've always done. Tell our stories. So what Roger has done is really incredible. And kudos, and we all know the work he's done in the documentary branch and has really changed the game.
Thank you.
That's what's changed too.
Thank you. It hasn't been easy, and I get constant pushback from the white establishment who wanna you know hold on to their power. Who wants to give up power? Who wants to cede power so easily, right? So I'm getting this constant pushback and you know, and attacked for that work. But you know, that's what you know, that's part of the you know the fight, right? You if you're not getting attacked, then there's a problem.
Right, you're not doing anything.
Ruba, I'm so glad that you are here so that people aren't being modest, because that is the number one thing we cannot be. We cannot downplay these incredible historic achievements. And before we wrap this up, I would like to look to the future for just a moment and ask everyone their one hope. What is your one wish for 10 years from now? And Yoruba, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so I guess keeping on the gatekeeper theme, that we have, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but at least that half the studios and streaming and cable are run by people of color, by African Americans. That's my hope, that in 10 years, at least half of them are run by us.
Hill, for you.
I hope that Roger has 5 more Oscars. And I'd like to see, obviously, to follow on some studios run by folks with melanin in their skin and curl in their hair, for sure. But beyond that, I think that busting up what's happening in these agencies is important. These major agencies control a lot, and there is virtually no stream, for ownership and talent. And there's so much Black talent. How come there's not a major Black agency? And certainly one could be created based off the level of talent and income and earnings that happen across platforms in our industry, just from the talent side, writing side, music side, etc. So it's not. I'm not even saying it has to be an infiltration of the current agencies. It could be a new standalone. When we see the amazing work that Charles King is doing, but knowing that he had ascended through the agency ranks and then left to do his thing, which is incredible with Macro. What would it look like to have some, an organization like Macro grow and grow and grow such that they acquire WME, or they acquire CAA, or they acquire UTA. And then you have this entity that has a lot of sway worldwide in many ways, from the advertising side to the distribution side to the green light and streaming side, all of those things. And so I just think that ownership, it goes back, that's kind of feels like a theme, owning our stuff in all areas. So that would be the goal. Plus Roger having Oscars.
We've got to set up for this new generation here. Hello.
Yes. Oh my God. Oh.
Cheers, everybody. He's licking his hands, very sanitary amidst COVID.
It's COVID. We're all working with our children or fur children in the home. It's just how it goes at the moment. Well, last but certainly not least, Roger, your dream for 10 years from now.
All right. Well, I have to throw that back at you, Hill, and you, Ruba. I hope that you, Ruba, and Hill both have 5 Oscars.
Yeah.
Win an Oscar a year. And I think, looking at Hill's son there, I think that what I really also hope for is that young brown-skinned kids can grow up and feel like I want to be in the industry, want to be directors, want to be producers, want to be actors, want to be in the business, and feel that there are any barriers to that those barriers are gone, that they can talk about a time when there were barriers, when Hollywood was making films about stereotypes and racist films, but that was in the past, and that they can achieve the greatest heights of their career, like any kid that was born into white privilege. So that is my hope. It's for the younger generation to be able to grow up differently than what we've had to struggle with.
Well, thank you all so much for your insight. And here is to 15 more Oscars for the collective group. I didn't have enough hands to do it. So 5, and 5 more. So congratulations on all that you've achieved. And thank you for sharing this insight. Thank you all for watching this panel, Black Hollywood, Then and Now. I'm Angelique Johnson, Variety.
Thank you, Angelique, and thank you, all of you. What a potent conversation. Our look at the film industry is not limited to the United States. Our emerging and student filmmaker competition received entries from 15 different countries, and many of those countries are represented in the finalists' films on our schedule, so I hope you'll check them out. And so until the next time, march on, good people.
Yeah.